The night I lost my job, my father started throwing my belongings into heavy black garbage bags. He looked me dead in the eye and told me my sister needed the house more than I did. My sister stormed into the hallway screaming about who was going to pay her luxury car loan now. My mother just stood there crossing her arms and backed her up, telling me to go find a homeless shelter. I stood my ground and said absolutely nothing about the multi-million-dollar tech company entirely in my name or the luxury beachfront estate I secretly owned. Before I continue this wild story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members. My name is Beatrice. I am 33 years old, and for the past 5 years, I have been living a careful double life just to survive the people who were supposed to love me. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Chicago meant projecting an image of flawless perfection to the outside world. Behind the heavy mahogany doors of our sprawling six-bedroom estate, my reality was incredibly different and deeply painful. I was always the family disappointment, the quiet daughter who never quite fit into their elite country club lifestyle or superficial social circles. Yesterday afternoon, I walked through the grand front door feeling utterly exhausted after a long day in the city. I had just been officially laid off from my mid-level corporate marketing job. It was a mundane role I maintained purely as a cover story, a simple distraction to keep my parents from digging into my actual personal finances and discovering the truth. As I stepped into the massive foyer, dropping my purse on the antique console table, I expected the usual cold silence. Instead, I found my father Richard standing squarely in the middle of the formal living room. He was holding a stack of heavy-duty black garbage bags. He did not ask how my day was. He did not say hello or offer a welcoming smile. He simply shoved a handful of my favorite silk blouses into a plastic bag and tossed it aggressively onto the polished hardwood floor. I stood there completely frozen, trying to process the horrifying sight of my entire adult life being boxed up like unwanted charity donations. Before I could even open my mouth to ask what was happening, he pointed a stiff finger directly at the front door. "You have exactly until midnight to get your useless junk out of this house," he demanded, his voice echoing sharply off the high vaulted ceilings. "Vanessa and Liam need the master suite to start their family. They are getting married soon, and they simply cannot have you taking up valuable space like some pathetic spinster burden." I stared at the black garbage bags near the curved staircase. The sheer unapologetic audacity of his words knocked the breath right out of my lungs. Spinster burden. That was exactly what he called me to my face. I had lived quietly in this house for 5 straight years, sacrificing my own independence. When my parents faced a secret and terrifying financial crisis years ago, they begged me to move back home to help manage the property. What they never admitted out loud to anyone in their wealthy social circles was that I was the one quietly paying the massive mortgage directly to the bank every single month. Richard told everyone at his golf club that he was handling the family finances while he was secretly relying on my steady deposits to keep the bank from foreclosing on his precious estate. I paid for the heavy slate roof over their heads, the immaculate landscaping that kept up their wealthy facade, and the soaring property taxes they could no longer afford. Yet here he was calling me a total failure who had not built a real life. "You cannot just throw me out on the street," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady despite the shaking in my hands. "I pay the utility bills here. I pay the mortgage every month." Richard let out a harsh, mocking laugh that made my stomach turn. "You pay rent like any other common tenant, Beatrice. And as the legal homeowner, I am officially terminating your lease right now. Your sister is 29 years old. She is young and beautiful, and she is actually moving forward in life. Liam comes from a wealthy family. They need this large space to build their future together. You are 33 and completely single. You have failed at building a family for yourself, so you need to step aside for the golden child." He actually used those exact words, as if my existence was just a temporary placeholder until Vanessa needed my bedroom. It was staggering to witness. I looked at this man, who I had financially rescued time and time again, and realized he had never truly viewed me as a daughter. I was just a walking automated teller machine that he could easily discard the moment it suited his selfish narrative. He truly believed I was just a lowly marketing employee who should fall to her knees and be grateful for the privilege of paying his expensive bills. Before I could formulate a proper response, heavy footsteps pounded down the grand staircase. Vanessa stormed into the hallway, her face twisted into an ugly, entitled snarl. She did not ask why I looked so pale or offer a single shred of sisterly sympathy for the fact that our father was currently bagging up my winter coats. She marched right up to me and shoved her glowing cell phone just inches from my face. My Mercedes autopay bounced. She screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. The dealership called me while I was at a VIP bridal fitting with Liam's mother. It was incredibly humiliating. You promised you would keep funding my car lease, Beatrice. Who is going to pay my car loan now? I looked at the bright red declined notification flashing on her screen. I never once promised to pay for her luxury vehicle. 3 years ago, my parents had secretly linked my secondary checking account to Vanessa's expensive lease agreement without my consent. When I discovered the fraudulent connection, they staged a massive dramatic family intervention, playing the ultimate victims. They claimed Vanessa desperately needed a reliable luxury car for her new job, and that canceling the payments would destroy her credit and ruin her entire life. They guilted me into keeping the peace, telling me I owed it to the family because I had no children of my own to support and therefore had disposable income. I had absorbed that heavy financial blow silently, just like I absorbed every other unreasonable demand they placed on me over the years. I lost my marketing job today, I said, stating the simple, unvarnished fact, looking directly into Vanessa's furious blue eyes. I do not have the money in that checking account to cover your luxury car anymore. Vanessa gasped dramatically, placing a manicured hand over her chest, as if I had physically struck her. You lost your job today. Are you kidding me right now? My wedding is in 6 months, Beatrice. I have massive vendor deposits due. I have a custom designer dress to pay for. How could you be so incredibly selfish? She turned to our father, stomping her foot on the floor like a petulant toddler denied a toy. Dad, she is trying to ruin my perfect life. She is doing this on purpose because she is jealous of Liam and me. Right on cue, my mother, Patricia, swept into the room from the kitchen. She crossed her arms tightly over her expensive cashmere sweater and glared at me with pure, unadulterated disdain. You always have to make everything about yourself, Beatrice, she said, her tone dripping with disgust. Go find a local homeless shelter for all I care. Just get your bags out of this house and stop dragging your sister down when she is supposed to be celebrating. They stood there together, a united front of entitlement and cruelty, fully expecting me to break down and beg for their mercy. They expected the quiet, compliant daughter who would do absolutely anything to earn their conditional love. But I did not cry. I did not yell or throw a tantrum. I calmly reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the heavy brass house key. I dropped it right into the open garbage bag at my father's feet. I turned around, walked out the front door, and sat down in the driver's seat of my sedan. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct number for my private wealth manager. Cancel all recurring transfers to Richard and Vanessa, I said clearly into the receiver. Let it all burn. I dropped the heavy brass house key into the garbage bag at my father's feet. The metallic thud sounded like the locking of a vault. I turned toward the heavy oak front door, ready to walk away from the suffocating weight of this house forever. But Patricia was not done. My mother lunged forward, her expensive tennis shoes squeaking against the polished hardwood floor, and physically blocked the entryway. She spread her arms wide, her face flushed with the kind of indignant rage reserved for when she was denied something she felt entitled to. You are not leaving this house until you write a check, she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Vanessa needs $10,000 for the wedding catering deposit by tomorrow morning. You know Liam's family is expecting a 5-star dining experience, and you owe your sister this after ruining her car lease. I stared at the woman who had spent my entire childhood demanding perfection while simultaneously resenting any independence I achieved. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had quietly funneled into this family over the past 5 years. The mortgage payments, the utility bills, the massive property taxes, all while they treated me like an unwanted tenant. You wanted me out, I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm. I am out. The catering deposit is not my problem. Patricia gasped, placing a hand over her chest in a practiced display of maternal shock. You selfish, ungrateful girl! We gave you a roof over your head. We allowed you to stay here while you worked that pathetic little mid-level marketing job. The least you can do is support your family when they need you. I looked past her to where Vanessa was still pouting on the stairs, and Richard was tying up the garbage bag containing my winter coats. They genuinely believed I was broken. They believed that without their conditional shelter, I would crumble and beg for forgiveness. Excuse me, I said, stepping firmly to the side and reaching for the brass door handle. I pulled the heavy door open, letting the crisp Chicago air flood the stagnant foyer. I did not look back as I walked down the brick pathway to my modest sedan. The drive away from the affluent suburban neighborhood was completely silent. I did not turn on the radio. I just let the rhythm of the road steady my breathing. As I merged onto the highway heading toward the city, my cell phone rang through the car Bluetooth system. The caller ID displayed the name Evan, my lead acquisitions director. I answered the call. Beatrice Evan said, his voice crisp and professional. I just got the alert about your corporate email being deactivated at the marketing firm. Are we officially initiating the exit protocol today? Yes, Evan, I replied, merging into the fast lane. The cover story is officially over. They laid me off this afternoon, and Richard just kicked me out of the house. A sharp laugh came through the speakers. Kicked you out? If he only knew. Do you want me to arrange a luxury hotel suite in downtown Chicago for the rest of the week? No, I said, feeling a genuine smile touch my lips for the first time all day. I am heading to the airport. I need the ocean air. What my family did not know, what no one in their superficial social circle knew, was that my boring mid-level marketing job was a carefully constructed facade. 5 years ago, when I moved back to Chicago to supposedly help my family, I had just sold my first digital communications startup. I took that massive capital and quietly founded Apex Digital, a highly successful tech public relations firm. While my father thought I was fetching coffee and writing generic press releases for a small agency, I was actually building a multi-million-dollar empire from my laptop in my childhood bedroom. I kept my wealth entirely hidden. I knew exactly what Richard and Patricia would do if they discovered I was a multimillionaire. They would demand total control. They would expect me to fund their extravagant lifestyle pay for Vanessa's endless whims and subsidize the country club memberships they could no longer afford. So I played the part of the struggling, unremarkable middle manager. I drove a basic sedan. I wore modest clothes to family dinners. I paid their mortgage directly to the bank through a shielded account, letting Richard pretend he was the great provider. I will handle the transition, Evan continued. We have several major contracts closing this week. The tech sector is scrambling, and our quarterly profits are up by 22%. By the way, the legal team finished reviewing the blind trust documents for your new acquisitions. Everything is ironclad. Excellent, I said. Keep the operations running smoothly. I will be working remotely for the next few weeks. Call me only for top-tier approvals. I ended the call and drove straight to the international airport. I bypassed the standard parking garage and pulled into the private executive terminal. I tossed my keys to the valet and walked onto the tarmac where a chartered jet was waiting. The flight to Massachusetts was incredibly peaceful. Looking down at the clouds, I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations finally lifting off my shoulders. They thought they had discarded a burden. They had no idea they had just severed their only financial lifeline. When I landed, a private car was waiting to drive me to the ferry, and soon I was stepping onto the cobblestone streets of Nantucket. I took a deep breath of the salty ocean air. This was my sanctuary. 2 years ago, after closing a massive public relations contract with a global tech conglomerate, I rewarded myself. I purchased a breathtaking $4.5 million beachfront property on the island. I paid entirely in cash using a blind limited liability company to ensure my name never appeared on any public real estate records my father might stumble across. The property was magnificent. A sprawling shingle-style estate with wraparound cedar decks, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic, and private stairs leading directly down to a secluded beach. It was everything my parents' dark, oppressive suburban mansion was not. It was open, filled with light, and completely mine. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the expansive foyer. The house manager had prepared everything flawlessly. Fresh hydrangeas sat on the reclaimed wood dining table, and the thermostat was set to the perfect temperature. I dropped my single travel bag onto the plush white sofa in the living room and walked out onto the back deck. The sound of the crashing waves drowned out the lingering echoes of Patricia's shrill demands and Vanessa's selfish tantrums. I leaned against the glass railing, watching the tide roll in. I was not a homeless, unemployed spinster. I was a 33-year-old self-made CEO, standing on the deck of a multi-million-dollar estate, completely unbothered by the dramatic eviction that was supposed to break me. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the chef kitchen, enjoying the absolute silence of the massive house. No more tiptoeing around Richard's explosive moods. No more listening to Patricia compare me to Vanessa. I sat down at the massive granite kitchen island, opened my laptop, and began reviewing the latest financial reports for Apex Digital. The numbers were truly staggering. We were on track to double our revenue by the end of the fiscal year. For the next few hours, I lost myself in the comforting rhythm of executive decision-making. I approved 3 new marketing campaigns, authorized a significant hiring expansion for our West Coast office, and reviewed the preliminary paperwork for a new corporate headquarters downtown. I was in complete control of my universe. As the sun began to set, casting brilliant streaks of pink and gold across the ocean water, I closed my laptop and stretched. I decided to order fresh seafood from a local high-end restaurant and spend the evening reading on the deck. I walked into the master's suite, a massive room with a private balcony and a custom marble bathroom, to unpack my few belongings. I placed my phone on the nightstand and walked into the bathroom to wash my face. As I turned on the brass faucet, I heard my phone begin to vibrate aggressively against the wood table. It was a harsh, continuous buzzing that signaled a rapid succession of incoming notifications. I dried my hands on a plush towel and walked back into the bedroom, feeling a sudden, inexplicable tightening in my chest. I picked up the device and looked at the illuminated screen. The notification center was entirely filled with furious, frantic text messages. They were all from Richard. The first message read, "What did you do to the bank accounts?" The second message arrived a minute later. "The bank just called my cell phone. They said the automatic mortgage payment was reversed." The third message was written entirely in capital letters. "The mortgage is 3 months past due." I stared at the screen, watching the little typing bubble appear and disappear as Richard's panic clearly escalated in real time. For 5 years, I had been transferring the exact mortgage amount into a specific account that automatically paid the lender. Richard had assured my mother and Vanessa that he was paying the bills, masking his own failing business ventures with my secret money. When I called my wealth manager from the driveway and canceled those transfers, I pulled the rug out from under his carefully constructed lie. The typing bubble disappeared, replaced by a final blistering text message that lit up my screen. "Fix this right now, Beatrice. I mean it. Transfer the money back immediately, or I am calling the police and having you arrested for theft. You are destroying this family." 14 days of absolute silence passed. I sat peacefully on the expansive cedar deck of my Nantucket home, watching the Atlantic Ocean roll in and out while my cell phone vibrated off the granite kitchen island inside. I chose not to block Richard's phone number. Blocking him meant I could not document the inevitable unraveling of his fragile financial ecosystem. Every morning, I drank my black coffee and scrolled through a vertical wall of frantic text messages. They started as aggressive commands demanding I fix the automatic bank transfers immediately. By day 5, they turned into manipulative guilt trips about family loyalty. By day 10, they morphed into unhinged threats of severe legal action. I ignored every single one, focusing instead on running Apex Digital from my oceanfront sanctuary. On the late afternoon of the 14th day, Richard crossed a definitive line from merely desperate to utterly delusional. My phone chimed with a new voicemail notification. I pressed play and placed the phone on speaker, listening to my father's voice echo through my pristine, quiet kitchen. Beatrice, you have left me no choice. I am contacting my attorney to file formal criminal charges against you for elder abuse and grand larceny. You deliberately sabotaged my banking infrastructure and abandoned your elderly parents to face financial ruin. If you do not wire the past due mortgage balance by 5 o'clock today, I am calling the authorities to have you arrested wherever you are hiding. The audacity of the recorded message was impressive to witness. He was a 59-year-old able-bodied man playing the tragic victim of elder abuse, simply because his 33-year-old daughter finally stopped paying for the luxury roof over his head. I did not feel a single shred of panic. I did not feel the familiar toxic guilt tightening my chest. I felt only the cold precision of a chief executive officer dealing with a hostile corporate liability. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. He answered on the very first ring. "I knew you would come to your senses," Richard barked into the receiver, his voice thick with smug, unearned satisfaction. "Have you initiated the wire transfer yet?" I leaned back against the cool marble counter, looking out at the private beach. "I am calling to offer you a vital lesson in real estate law," I said, my tone completely flat and devoid of emotion. "You cannot sue someone for elder abuse simply because they decided to stop actively funding your extravagant lifestyle. I am not on the property deed to that house, Richard. I am not on the mortgage paperwork with the bank. I never signed a lease agreement with you. The fact that the bank is initiating aggressive foreclosure proceedings because you are 3 months behind on payments is entirely your personal problem. You took all the public credit for maintaining that suburban estate for 5 long years. Now you get to take the full public credit for losing it completely." There was a heavy intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the distinct electronic sound of a phone being placed on speaker. I could hear the immediate background noise of the formal dining room I had walked out of exactly 2 weeks prior. "How dare you speak to your father that way?" Patricia's shrill voice pierced through the speakerphone, echoing with furious indignation. "You owe us, Beatrice. We put a solid roof over your head for 18 years. We clothed you and fed you and sacrificed our own personal comfort to make sure you had everything you needed growing up. You owe us your very life, and you are legally obligated to help this family when we are in a time of need." I let her rant, filling the air with her heavily practiced victimhood, before I cut her off completely. "I do not owe you a single dime, Patricia," I stated clearly, leaving no room for debate. "In fact, if we are accurately calculating historical family debts, I believe my personal ledger is more than balanced. Do you want to discuss exactly how you managed to pay for Vanessa's luxurious European backpacking trip 10 years ago?" A sudden, heavy, dead silence fell over the line. They knew exactly what I was talking about, but they had spent a full decade pretending the incident never happened. When I was 18, I discovered that my college fund, a specialized savings plan established by my late grandfather specifically for my higher education, had been completely drained without my knowledge. "You stole exactly $80,000 from my educational trust fund to pay for Vanessa to spend 6 months drinking expensive wine in Italy and shopping in Paris." I continued, refusing to let them escape the deeply uncomfortable truth. "You looked me in the eye and told me the stock market crashed and the fund was wiped out. I worked 3 exhausting jobs and took out massive predatory student loans to pay for my own university education because you actively prioritized Vanessa's summer vacation over my entire professional future. I paid you back for every single meal you ever fed me the moment I took over your bloated mortgage payments 5 years ago. You do not get to play the tragic victim here today. You are just furious because you finally ran out of my hard-earned money to steal to support a lifestyle you cannot afford." Before Patricia could formulate another lie to justify her past theft, a loud crashing sound erupted through the phone. Someone had literally snatched the device off the wooden table. "Beatrice, you psychotic, jealous witch!" Vanessa's voice was hysterical, breaking into ugly, heaving sobs that severely distorted her words. "You ruined my entire life today. You absolutely destroyed everything I have built." I held the phone slightly away from my ear as her dramatic shrieks reached a fever pitch. What exactly did I ruin today, Vanessa? My upscale bridal shower, she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated rage. I was at the prestigious country club with Liam's mother and all of his wealthy aunts. We were having formal high tea on the outdoor veranda. Do you have any idea how culturally important these people are? They are old money, Beatrice. They basically run all of Chicago high society. And right in the middle of opening expensive crystal gifts, a massive commercial tow truck pulled directly up to the pristine front entrance of the club. The repossession agent walked right past the uniformed valet, past the horrified maitre d', and interrupted the entire private party. He loudly announced that the financial lease on my Mercedes was in severe default and demanded I physically hand over the keys in front of 40 incredibly wealthy women. I could perfectly picture the devastating scene. Vanessa, in a white designer dress dripping in fake diamonds, forced to surrender her ultimate status symbol in front of the very people she was desperately trying to impress. The public humiliation must have been absolutely blinding. It was the most deeply embarrassing moment of my entire adult life. Vanessa sobbed, her breath hitching wildly into the microphone. Liam's mother looked at me like I was absolute garbage off the street. They literally towed my car away down the main drive while everyone watched silently from the patio. I had to ride home in the back of a standard Uber. You did this to me. You deliberately let that car payment bounce. You need to fix this massive disaster right now, Beatrice. I strictly demand that you wire me the cash to buy a brand new luxury car outright before Liam finds out the truth and cancels the wedding entirely. You owe me a new vehicle to save my ruined reputation. Her delusion was so profound, it was almost breathtaking to witness. She was sitting in a rapidly foreclosing home, demanding I purchase a luxury vehicle to repair a fragile social image built entirely on my stolen wages. You are a 29-year-old woman, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy professional register. Buy your own car entirely on your own. I ended the call, cutting off Vanessa's screaming mid-sentence. I tossed the phone onto the counter. Silence washed over me, replacing the toxic noise of my family with the rhythmic sound of ocean waves. I poured iced water, ready to disconnect. Just then, the sharp ping of my secure email server echoed from my laptop. It was an urgent message from Evan, my lead acquisitions director. The subject line read, "Immediate review required, potential buyout opportunity." I opened the encrypted dossier. Liam's software startup was drowning in massive corporate debt. He was begging for an acquisition to save him from total ruin. Apex Digital was the only entity with necessary liquidity to buy them out. Liam had no idea that the sole founder and chief executive officer of the only company capable of saving his future was the unemployed spinster sister he was about to marry into. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading the email from my executive team over and over again. Liam was desperately seeking a corporate buyout to save his failing software startup from total bankruptcy. The irony was almost too heavy to hold. Vanessa paraded Liam around our family gatherings as a tech billionaire, a self-made genius who was going to elevate her into the highest tier of Chicago high society. In reality, he was drowning in debt and actively begging my company for a financial lifeline. He had absolutely no idea that the chief executive officer of Apex Digital, the only firm willing to even look at his pathetic portfolio, was the woman his fiancée had just kicked out of her childhood home. I smiled, typing a quick reply to my acquisitions director. I instructed him to request full financial disclosures from Liam and to string the negotiations along. I wanted to see exactly how deep his fraud went. Before I could even lock my phone, the screen lit up with a barrage of new notifications. They were not texts from Richard or Vanessa. They were social media alerts, dozens of them pouring in by the second. My phone vibrated so violently it nearly slid off the granite kitchen counter. I opened my primary social media application and found my inbox flooded with hateful messages from extended family members I had not spoken to in years. Aunt Susan, Uncle David, and a dozen cousins were actively tagging me in a public video. I clicked the link, and watched my mother perform the greatest acting role of her entire life. Patricia had gone live on the internet. She was sitting on the floor of the formal living room, looking intentionally disheveled. She had wiped off her expensive makeup and forced her hair into a messy knot to look like a woman on the absolute brink of despair. She stared into the camera and forced out loud, heaving sobs, though her eyes remained entirely dry. "My own daughter has destroyed us," she wailed to her audience of hundreds. "Beatrice drained our life savings. She manipulated our banking accounts and stole the money we needed to survive. She ran away and left her elderly parents to face imminent foreclosure. We are going to be thrown out on the street because of her greed. Please share this video so everyone knows what a monster she truly is." I watched the video in total silence. She did not mention that I had been paying their massive mortgage for 5 years. She did not mention that Richard had thrown my belongings into garbage bags just hours earlier. She completely omitted the fact that they had stolen my college fund a decade ago to pay for Vanessa to travel across Europe. She simply painted herself as the tragic victim of a greedy, ungrateful daughter. The comments below the video were vicious. People I shared a bloodline with were calling me evil, toxic, and a criminal. Uncle David left a public comment stating I should be locked in a federal prison. Cousin Emily wrote that I was a complete disgrace to the family name and banned from all future holiday gatherings. Any normal person might have broken down under the weight of such intense public hatred. A younger version of me might have frantically typed out a long emotional defense, trying to explain the truth and beg for their understanding. But the woman standing in the beachfront kitchen was a seasoned corporate executive who understood the immense power of legal documentation. I did not shed a single tear. I did not type a single defensive reply to my aunt or my uncle. I remained completely silent and went to work. I carefully screen-recorded the entire live video, ensuring I captured every defamatory claim Patricia made. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single hateful comment, every specific threat, and every libelous post shared by my extended family. I compiled all the digital evidence into a secure encrypted folder. I opened my corporate email and drafted a message to the senior litigation partner at Apex Digital. I attached the folder and typed a clear, simple directive. My family is launching a coordinated smear campaign based on verifiable lies. I want you to begin building a comprehensive defamation and libel case against Patricia and Richard immediately. Do not send a cease and desist letter. Let them continue posting. Let them dig their own legal graves so deep they will never be able to climb out. I closed my laptop and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, completely unbothered by the digital storm raging online. I knew that my silence would drive Patricia absolutely crazy. She thrived on conflict and reaction. By ignoring her public performance, I was starving her of the attention she desperately craved. But my silence also made them dangerously desperate. They needed me physically present to bully me into fixing their shattered finances. Since I was not answering my phone, Richard had to find another way to track me down. I later learned exactly how they managed to locate my private sanctuary. My cousin Mark worked as a senior network technician for a major national telecommunications provider. He was part of the angry mob attacking me online. Richard called Mark and begged for a favor, playing the role of the terrified father looking for his missing daughter. Mark illegally bypassed his company's security protocols and pinged the GPS location of my cellular device. He broke federal privacy laws to hand my exact coordinates over to my furious parents. Mark called Richard and told him my phone was currently broadcasting from a specific address in Nantucket, Massachusetts. When Richard and Patricia looked up the location on a satellite map, they saw an ultra-exclusive neighborhood filled with multi-million-dollar beachfront estates. Their narrow, entitled minds immediately jumped to the most condescending conclusion possible. They assumed I had completely run out of money and was currently squatting in a vacant off-season rental property. Patricia actually laughed out loud when she saw the images. She told Richard that I must have begged a wealthy family to let me work as a live-in maid, just to keep a roof over my head. She believed I was scrubbing toilets for rich people because I was too incompetent to survive on my own. Armed with my exact location and a toxic sense of righteous indignation, they did not hesitate. They threw their designer luggage into Richard's luxury sport utility vehicle and began the long, aggressive drive toward the East Coast. They fully intended to march onto that property, humiliate me in front of my supposed wealthy employers, and physically drag me back to Chicago to resume my role as their personal automated teller machine. They thought they were hunting down a frightened runaway. They had absolutely no idea they were driving straight into a fortified kingdom owned by a woman who held the literal deed to the ground they were about to step on. I spent the next 2 days enjoying the absolute tranquility of island life. I walked along the pristine shoreline in the early mornings, letting the cold, salt water wash over my bare feet. I ate fresh seafood on my massive deck and slept peacefully to the sound of crashing waves. I spent my afternoons diving deep into the corporate files my team had extracted from Liam's failing startup. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. Liam had falsified user engagement metrics. He had secured massive bridge loans based on entirely fabricated revenue projections. He was committing federal wire fraud to keep his sinking ship afloat, all while promising Vanessa a life of endless luxury. I began drafting a highly specific acquisition contract. I designed it to be a beautiful corporate trap. It would look like a generous lifeline on paper, but the due diligence clauses would legally bind him to expose every single fraudulent number he had ever reported. I was sitting on my private deck, the ocean breeze gently lifting the pages of the acquisition contract I was reviewing. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling completely in control of my destiny. The silence of the morning was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crashing of the tide against the sand. Then the tranquility shattered. A violent, aggressive pounding echoed through the entire house. Someone was smashing their fists against my solid mahogany front door with enough force to shake the heavy doorframe. "Open up right now. We know you are hiding in there, Beatrice." Richard bellowed, his voice muffled but undeniably furious through the thick wood. I never jumped. I did not panic. I simply placed my coffee mug on the patio table. I closed the confidential file containing the blueprint for Liam's destruction. I took a deep breath, feeling a cold smile spread across my face. The trespassers had arrived exactly as I knew they would. I pulled open the heavy front door, letting the cool breeze sweep inside. Richard stood on the pristine porch, his fist raised high, prepared to strike the wood again. His face was flushed deep red. Patricia stood behind him, shivering in a thin designer coat that was entirely inappropriate for the brisk coastal weather. Vanessa flanked them, scrolling aggressively on her phone. Total silence hung heavily in the salt air. Richard slowly lowered his fist, his eyes darting past my shoulder to take in the soaring, vaulted ceilings and the sweeping views of the Atlantic Ocean. The sheer scale of the estate temporarily robbed him of his rehearsed rage. Patricia, however, recovered instantly. She adjusted her silk scarf pushed to the front of the porch and let out a sharp, condescending scoff. Her eyes dragged up and down my casual linen pants and simple cashmere sweater. "So this is where you are scrubbing toilets now?" Patricia asked, her voice echoing sharply against the cedar shingles. "I always knew you lacked ambition, Beatrice, but running away to clean up after rich people just to escape your family obligations is a new low even for you. I suppose living in the servant quarters is better than a homeless shelter, but you still look like an absolute disgrace." I stood perfectly still, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. I did not step back to let them inside. I did not offer a polite greeting. I simply watched them, projecting the cold, detached authority I used to negotiate hostile corporate takeovers. "How did you find me?" I asked, keeping my tone completely flat and devoid of any emotional reaction. "It does not matter how we found you." Richard barked, his face regaining its furious crimson color as he stepped aggressively toward the threshold. "You have been ignoring my calls for days. You cut off the bank accounts without a single word of warning. We drove for hours to track down the runaway maid. You are going to let us inside right now, and you are going to fix the massive financial disaster you created." Before I could formally deny them entry, Vanessa physically shoved her way past my shoulder. Her sharp stiletto heels clicked obnoxiously against the imported white oak floors. She marched directly into the grand living room, dropping her oversized leather tote bag onto my custom white linen sofa without a single ounce of hesitation. "Oh my God, this place is actually incredible!" Vanessa shrieked, pulling out her phone and posing in front of the massive stone fireplace. "The natural lighting in here is absolutely flawless. I cannot believe you actually get paid to mop the floors in a house like this. It is totally wasted on you." Patricia followed her youngest daughter inside, ignoring my physical presence at the door. She wandered into the open-concept chef kitchen, running her hands over the pristine white marble countertops and inspecting the high-end stainless steel appliances with blatant envy. "It is certainly a step up from that miserable little apartment you used to rent in the city," Patricia noted, opening a custom cabinet. "You must have begged these poor owners to take you in. Do they know you stole from your own flesh and blood before fleeing the state?" I closed the front door behind them, leaning back against the wood. They had officially trespassed into my sanctuary, bringing their toxic, chaotic energy into the one place I had built to escape them. I watched Vanessa twirl around the living room, snapping rapid-fire selfies. She completely ignored the obvious fact that the house bore no signs of an active employer and no traces of servant quarters. Her profound entitlement blinded her to reality. "Dad, come look at this view," Vanessa yelled, waving Richard into the main room. He marched inside, his boots tracking dirt across the immaculate floors. "Look at this massive deck," Vanessa continued, pointing excitedly through the glass doors. "Liam and I have been desperately searching for a rehearsal dinner venue since you selfishly ruined my bridal shower, Beatrice. This rental property would be absolutely perfect. It is completely private, right on the water, and the kitchen is large enough for a massive catering team." Vanessa spun around and pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "Listen closely, Beatrice. You need to call whoever owns this property right now. Tell your bosses that your sister is getting married, and we need the keys for the entire weekend next month. They owe you a favor since you are probably working for minimum wage anyway. If they say no, tell them you will quit. We are not paying a venue fee when you have access to a place like this for free." The sheer magnitude of her delusion was fascinating to witness. She stood in the middle of a multi-million-dollar estate, demanding I beg fictional employers to let her host a free luxury party. I crossed my arms, letting the silence stretch out, allowing their ridiculous demands to hang heavily in the ocean air. "I am not calling anyone Vanessa," I stated simply, my voice completely calm. "And you are not hosting a single event in this house," Richard snapped. He stormed across the living room, closing the distance between us until he was standing just inches from my face. He reached into his thick jacket and pulled out a crumpled stack of final notices and bright pink foreclosure warnings. He slammed the entire stack down onto the flawless marble kitchen island with enough force to make Patricia jump backward. "Do you see these papers, Beatrice?" he screamed, a fleck of spit flying from his lips. "These are foreclosure notices. The bank is actively threatening to take our house. Liam's family is already suspicious because Vanessa lost her car, and now you are trying to make us homeless. You stopped paying the bills that you are legally obligated to pay as a member of this family." I looked down at the stack of bills and then back up into my father's furious eyes. "I am not obligated to pay for a house I do not own, Richard," I reminded him, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "I paid your bills for 5 years because you begged me to save you from bankruptcy. You repaid that favor by throwing my belongings into garbage bags and kicking me out onto the street. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the severe financial consequences, you ungrateful little brat." Richard bellowed, slamming his fist against the marble countertop. "You do not get to dictate the terms of our family structure. You owe us everything. You are going to pick up that telephone right now and call your wealthy employer. You are going to beg your boss for a massive cash advance on your miserable little salary. I do not care if you have to scrub these floors for the next 10 years for free. You will get me $30,000 by tomorrow morning to satisfy the bank and save my property." Patricia stepped forward, nodding enthusiastically in agreement. "It is the absolute least you can do, Beatrice. You humiliated your sister and you abandoned your parents. Get the money from your boss today, or we will make sure you lose this pathetic little cleaning job too. Richard leaned heavily against the marble island, crossing his arms tightly. His eyes narrowed into a dark, malicious glare. You think you can hide from us out here on an island, he sneered. If you do not get me that cash advance right now, I will personally track down the real owner of this estate. I will tell them exactly what kind of thief they have living under their expensive roof. I will tell your boss that you stole thousands of dollars from your elderly parents to fund your runaway lifestyle. I will make sure they fire you immediately and press criminal charges. I will gladly watch the local police drag you out of this beautiful house in handcuffs. I stared at them. Richard was breathing heavily, his face a mask of desperate, toxic rage. Patricia looked remarkably smug, firmly, believing they had successfully trapped me in a corner. Vanessa was ignoring the financial confrontation, having returned to taking glamorous photos on the expensive white sofa. They truly believed they held all the power. They believed I was a terrified, helpless maid who would crumble under their aggressive threats. They had no idea they were standing in a fortress owned entirely by the woman they were currently trying to blackmail. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I did not try to explain the complex legal structure of the blind trust that held the deed to the estate. I simply turned my back on my furious father, walked calmly to the far end of the kitchen, and picked up the sleek black landline phone resting on the wall console. "Who are you calling?" Richard demanded, stepping toward me with a renewed sense of panic. "Are you calling your boss? Tell them it is an absolute emergency." I held his gaze perfectly steady as I pressed 3 simple digits into the keypad. I listened to the brief ringtone before the local emergency dispatcher answered the line. "Yes, I have a major security issue," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent kitchen. "I currently have 3 hostile trespassers inside my home who are aggressively refusing to leave the premises. Yes, they are making severe threats of extortion." The dispatcher asked a rapid question on the other end of the line. I smiled, maintaining direct eye contact with Richard, as all the remaining color instantly drained from his face. "Yes, officer," I replied smoothly. "I am the sole legal homeowner. I have the official property deed right here in my hand. Please send your available officers to the property immediately to remove them from my estate." The dispatcher assured me patrol units were already en route. I hung up the sleek receiver, placing it back on the wall console. The heavy silence in the pristine kitchen was suddenly suffocating. Richard stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his face rapidly draining of that furious crimson color. For a single second, the harsh reality of my phone call penetrated his thick layer of aggressive entitlement. He looked around the immaculate marble kitchen and then back at me, his chest heaving with unsteady breaths. Patricia broke the tense silence first. Her sharp bark of laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "She actually thinks she can scare us, Richard." She crossed her arms defiantly. "She is completely bluffing. Do you honestly think the local police are going to take the word of a disgruntled maid over us? We are her parents. We will simply explain that she is having a severe mental breakdown. We will tell them she broke into this beautiful house, and we came from Chicago to safely retrieve her." Vanessa nodded eagerly, clutching her phone. "Yeah, Beatrice, you are going to look like a total psychopath when the cops get here. The actual owners of this property are going to press massive criminal charges against you for trespassing." I did not say a single word. I simply stood by the marble island and waited. Less than 4 minutes after I ended the call, the crunch of heavy tires on my gravel driveway broke the quiet ocean waves. Blue and red lights flashed rhythmically through the massive front windows, casting sharp, moving shadows across the white oak floors. 2 uniformed police officers approached the glass front door. The officers stepped directly into the grand foyer. They rested their hands cautiously on their duty belts, visually assessing the strange domestic standoff. Patricia practically threw herself toward the officers, her face instantly crumpling into a mask of pure maternal anguish. "Oh, thank goodness you are here," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured relief. "Please, you have to help us, officers." The lead officer, a tall, stern man, held up a firm hand. We received a call regarding 3 hostile trespassers refusing to leave the premises. Who made that call? I did, officer, I stated clearly, raising my hand. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sob. She is not well, officer, Patricia wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is our daughter Beatrice. She lost her miserable little marketing job and completely snapped. We drove from Illinois because we discovered she broke into this luxurious estate. She is squatting here illegally. We just want to take our sick daughter home and get her professional psychiatric help. Richard stepped forward, puffing out his chest. We tracked her phone here after she drained our bank accounts. We know she does not belong in a $4 million property. If you just let us gather her belongings, we will quietly escort her off the island. The 2 officers exchanged a careful glance. The lead officer finally looked at me. Mom, do you have any legal authorization to be inside this residence right now? He asked, his tone indicating he was fully prepared to ask me to leave. I remained absolutely, perfectly calm. I opened the top drawer of the kitchen island, retrieving a thick manila folder and my leather wallet. I walked slowly toward the lead officer and handed him my Massachusetts state driver's license along with the certified legal documents from the folder. I am the sole legal homeowner, officer. I said, my voice steady and commanding. This property is held under a private blind trust registered as Apex Coastal Holdings Limited Liability Company. Those certified documents clearly verify that I am the sole managing director and sole benefactor of that trust. The deed is fully executed and legally recorded with the county clerk. These 3 individuals standing here today are my completely estranged parents and sister. They aggressively forced their physical way into my private home uninvited. They are demanding $30,000 in cash and explicitly refusing to leave my property. The lead officer took the documents. He scrutinized my state identification, comparing the name and photo to my face. Then he opened the certified trust paperwork. Patricia let out a loud scoff, crossing her arms defiantly. Do not bother reading that fake garbage, officer. She probably printed those fake papers at a public library. The officer ignored her. He spent a minute cross-referencing the notarized signatures and state registration seals. When he finally looked up, his entire demeanor had shifted. He handed the documents and my license back to me with a respectful nod. Thank you, Miss Wilson. Everything appears to be perfectly in order. He turned sharply to face Richard and Patricia. His hand dropped firmly back to his duty belt. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, you are actively trespassing on private property. The legal homeowner has officially requested that you vacate the premises. You will turn around right now, walk out the main front door, and get into your vehicle. If you hesitate or refuse to comply with my direct order, I will place all 3 of you under immediate arrest for criminal trespassing and attempted extortion. The absolute shock that washed over my father's face was a masterpiece. The color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale. The multi-million-dollar oceanfront estate he was standing inside did not belong to a fictional wealthy boss. It belonged entirely to the daughter he had treated like a financial burden for 33 years. But that is impossible, Patricia stammered, her confident facade completely shattering. She is a low-level marketing assistant. She cannot afford this. She stole our money. I said leave, the lead officer barked, his voice booming through the foyer. Now! The younger officer stepped forward, gesturing forcefully toward the open front door. Move it. We are not asking again. Richard visibly swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping in sudden humiliating defeat. He grabbed Patricia by the arm and roughly pulled her toward the exit. Vanessa stood frozen by the sofa, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, before scurrying after her parents. The officers followed them closely, making sure they cleared the threshold. I walked to the open doorway and watched the pathetic procession. As soon as her heels hit the soft green grass, her initial fear violently transformed into explosive rage. She threw her hands in the air and launched into a full-blown tantrum right in front of the police cruisers. You are a selfish, evil witch! Beatrice Vanessa screamed at the top of her lungs. You are dead to us. You are completely dead to this family. I am banning you from my wedding forever. Do not you dare try to show up. You are a monster. The lead officer pointed a stern finger at Vanessa, warning her to stay quiet and get into the vehicle immediately. Richard shoved his screaming youngest daughter into the back seat and slammed the door shut. He climbed into the front driver's seat without looking back. Patricia hid her face behind her hands in the passenger seat. I stood silently on my pristine front porch, watching as the two police cruisers positioned themselves firmly behind Richard's vehicle. The flashing lights guided the SUV slowly down the long, winding gravel driveway, ensuring they were gone. I waited until the taillights completely disappeared around the bend, before closing the heavy mahogany door and locking the deadbolt. The toxic intrusion was officially over. They had seen my success, and they had been legally banished from it. I walked slowly back through the grand living room and stepped out onto the expansive back deck. I sat down at the patio table and reached for the confidential acquisition files I had abandoned earlier. Just as my fingers brushed the thick paper, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the glass tabletop. It was not Richard or Patricia. The caller identification displayed a Chicago area code I recognized instantly. I did not answer it. I let the device buzz until the call rolled over to the automated voicemail system. A few short seconds later, the small notification icon popped up, indicating a new message had been recorded. I pressed play and held the small speaker close to my ear. It was Liam. His voice sounded incredibly strained, breathless, and completely desperate. "Beatrice, please tell me you still have strong connections in the corporate tech sector," he begged. "I really need a massive favor from you right now today. I have been desperately trying to reach the chief executive officer of Apex Digital. My company is completely going under, and they are the only firm reviewing my formal buyout application. I know Vanessa hates you right now, but please, I am practically begging you to help me secure a private meeting with the Apex CEO before my software startup collapses entirely." The private flight to Chicago was entirely smooth. I sat in my private charter jet reviewing the financial dossiers my acquisitions team compiled on Liam. His software company was bleeding capital at an unprecedented rate. He was burning through venture funding to maintain the illusion of success, while his actual product remained riddled with unpatched bugs. I landed at Midway and headed straight for the Apex Digital corporate headquarters downtown. I bypassed the main reception area and walked directly into the secure observation room adjacent to our primary executive boardroom. Evan was already there reviewing the printed copies of the preliminary merger agreements. He looked up and smiled, setting the files down on the polished mahogany table. "The audio feeds are perfectly clear," Evan said. "You will be able to hear every breath they take." I handed him the discreet wireless earpiece. "I will guide you through the negotiation," I told him. "Do not let him dictate the pace. Liam operates entirely on false confidence and borrowed prestige. We will let him construct his own trap using his undeniable arrogance. Push him on the user acquisition costs, but do not press too hard on the debt ratios. I want him to actively lie to your face on the recorded corporate record." Evan nodded, placing the earpiece securely into his right ear. He gathered the legal documents and walked into the main boardroom. I sat down in the leather chair in the observation room, pulling up the live camera feed on the monitor. The glass wall between the rooms was heavily tinted and completely soundproof, allowing me to monitor the physical body language of the meeting without ever being detected. Exactly 4 minutes later, the receptionist escorted Liam and his two nervous-looking board members into the executive suite. He wore a bespoke suit he could not afford, and swaggered with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he was the smartest person in any given building. "Thank you for accommodating us," Liam said, taking a seat. "I know your chief executive officer remains anonymous, but please pass along my gratitude for this opportunity. Tell him the chief executive is currently listening," I instructed Evan through the microphone. Evan smiled professionally. "Our founder is monitoring this meeting remotely. We can begin whenever you are ready." Liam puffed out his chest, thrilled that a tech billionaire was paying direct attention. He opened his laptop and began projecting his pitch deck onto the large screen. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. He displayed colorful graphs showing explosive upward trends and projected revenue growth defying basic laws of economics. We capture 30% of the regional market share, Liam boasted. Our user retention rate is 92%. We revolutionized our back-end algorithms, drastically reducing overhead costs. I stared at my own monitor where the actual unedited data files sat open. His real retention rate was 14%. His server costs were astronomical, and his active user count was inflated by thousands of dormant bot accounts. He was committing verifiable federal wire fraud with an absolute straight face. Ask about his financial backers, I whispered. Evan leaned forward. These numbers are aggressive, Liam, who is currently anchoring your investment rounds. Liam leaned back, adopting a smug posture. Our lead anchor investor is a prominent wealth manager in Chicago, Richard Wilson. He is a highly successful real estate developer and my future father-in-law. I laughed out loud. Richard Wilson was dodging aggressive calls from mortgage collectors and facing imminent foreclosure. Yet Liam was leveraging my father's fraudulent reputation to secure millions in bailout money. Richard has been instrumental in our aggressive growth strategy, Liam continued. He brings decades of old money prestige and severe financial backing. Marrying into the Wilson family has provided an untouchable foundation of corporate stability. Tell him that is what Apex Digital is looking for, I instructed Evan. Tell him we are prepared to move straight to the preliminary term sheet. Evan nodded thoughtfully, closing his notebook. That is incredibly reassuring to hear, Liam. Apex Digital highly values strong, secure family foundations in our acquisition targets. Given the impressive metrics you have presented today, we are actually prepared to bypass the standard secondary pitch process entirely. Evan reached into his leather portfolio and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table. We would like to offer you a preliminary merger agreement right now. Liam's eyes widened in genuine shock. His two board members exchanged frantic, desperate looks of pure relief. They had walked into the building expecting a grueling months-long negotiation process and were suddenly being handed a massive golden parachute on their very first day. Liam practically snatched the documents off the glass table, quickly scanning the top page. The purchase price is remarkably generous. Liam noted, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed excitement. It is more than double our current valuation estimates. I pressed the microphone button. Tell him the valuation reflects our absolute confidence in his reported user metrics and his prestigious family backing. Make sure he understands the strict due diligence clauses attached to the signature. The valuation is a direct reflection of the phenomenal numbers you presented today. Evan explained smoothly, echoing my exact words. However, because we are moving at an accelerated pace, this preliminary agreement contains an aggressive and totally non-negotiable due diligence clause. By signing today, you are legally binding your company to open every single internal server, every bank account, and every raw data file to our forensic accounting team within 48 hours. If your reported metrics are entirely accurate, the payout will be expedited. If there are any discrepancies, the financial penalties are severe and legally binding. Liam hesitated for a fraction of a second. I could see the sudden flash of cold panic in his eyes as he stared at the binding legal document. He knew his numbers were entirely fake. He knew opening his raw data servers to forensic accountants would instantly expose his massive federal fraud. But he was also staring at a purchase price that would save him from total bankruptcy and cement his fake billionaire status before his high society wedding. His ego completely overpowered his basic common sense. I do not even need my legal team to review this, Liam said, flashing that arrogant smile one more time. Our books are completely pristine, and Richard Wilson himself audited our final quarterly reports. He pulled a heavy silver pen from his pocket and signed his name on the dotted line. The trap snapped completely shut. He had just legally authorized Apex Digital to seize all of his fraudulent internal data. When the forensic accountants exposed the massive discrepancies, he would not just lose the acquisition deal, he would be legally liable for millions of dollars in strict breach of contract penalties. I had successfully cornered him into financial annihilation using his own undeniable arrogance. Evan collected the signed documents, securing them safely back inside his leather portfolio. "We will deploy our forensic accounting team to your headquarters tomorrow morning," Evan stated, standing up to shake Liam's hand. "We look forward to a swift and mutually beneficial transition." Liam stood up, puffing his chest out in complete triumph. He genuinely believed he had just outsmarted a major corporate entity. "This calls for a massive celebration," Liam announced, his voice loud and incredibly boisterous. "My beautiful fiancée Vanessa is hosting an incredibly lavish pre-wedding gala this Saturday evening at her parents' sprawling estate in the suburbs. It is going to be the social event of the entire season. All the major players in Chicago high society will be in attendance. I would be absolutely honored if you and the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Digital would attend as my personal VIP guests. It would be the perfect opportunity to introduce your anonymous founder to Richard Wilson and my powerful new family." I sat in the darkened observation room staring at the monitor as Liam practically begged the invisible Chief Executive Officer to attend his party. The sheer poetic irony of the invitation was almost overwhelming. They had banned Beatrice, the worthless spinster sister, from the wedding festivities, but they were practically groveling to host the anonymous billionaire CEO who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. I pressed the microphone button one final time, a cold, predatory smile curving my lips. I want to see the absolute devastation on their faces when they realize who they have been insulting this entire time. "Look him straight in the eyes," I whispered to Evan. "Tell him the Chief Executive Officer would be absolutely thrilled to attend." Evan smiled warmly at the doomed man standing across the table. "Thank you for the generous invitation, Liam. I can personally guarantee that our founder will be there. She is very much looking forward to finally meeting your remarkable family in person." The grand ballroom of the Oakbrook Country Club was draped in white silk. Waiters circulated carrying silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes. A string quartet played softly. I stood observing the illusion my family was trying to maintain. Near the towering ice sculpture, Richard and Patricia were holding court with Liam and his wealthy parents. Patricia wore a rented emerald green evening gown, while Richard sported a tuxedo that looked 10 years out of style. They were projecting supreme confidence, masking the severe financial ruin currently crushing them. "We have always believed in diversifying our vast real estate holdings," Richard boasted, his voice carrying easily over the music. "The market fluctuates, but when you own multiple properties, you learn to weather any storm." Patricia nodded. "We are actually considering acquiring another waterfront estate." The sheer audacity of their lies was breathtaking. They were actively bragging about a real estate portfolio that consisted entirely of a single suburban home in active foreclosure. Liam's parents nodded politely, oblivious to the couple drowning in debt. Vanessa stood next to Liam, playing the perfect wealthy bride-to-be. I glided into the ballroom. I moved with the fluid, absolute confidence of a woman who owned the room. I was wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue silk gown I had commissioned in Paris. The diamond necklace resting against my collarbone cost more than Vanessa's entire wedding budget. I walked to the mahogany bar, ordering a sparkling water. A few heads turned as I walked past, murmuring compliments, but I kept my focus entirely on my family. I spotted Evan, my executive vice president, entering through the opposite doors. He mingled with local executives, positioning himself near the main stage. We had a specific plan, and we were going to execute it flawlessly. I took a slow sip of my water, watching my father continue his ridiculous performance. He was regaling Liam's father with a fabricated story about his investments. They truly believed their own lies. My quiet observation was violently interrupted when a sharp gasp cut through the ambient noise. I turned my head to see Patricia staring directly at me. The polite society smile vanished from her face, replaced by a twisted mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes darted wildly over my midnight blue gown, taking in the obvious expensive tailoring and the sparkling diamonds. She grabbed Richard by the arm, digging sharply into his tuxedo sleeve. She whispered something frantic, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. Richard snapped his head around, his eyes locking onto mine. The color drained from his face before a deep, furious red rushed back. He muttered a quick excuse and began marching across the ballroom floor with Patricia. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply placed my glass down on the mahogany counter and waited. Patricia reached me first. She physically grabbed my bare arm, her nails digging painfully into my skin. How dare you show your face here? Patricia hissed, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper meant to stay below the music. How did you sneak in here? You are supposed to be banned from this property. I calmly looked down at her hand gripping my arm and then looked directly into her furious eyes. Let go of me, Patricia, I stated, my voice perfectly level. I will not ask you a second time. She snatched her hand back, but she did not retreat. Richard stepped up beside her, his physical presence meant to be entirely intimidating. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine, smelling strongly of expensive scotch and cheap desperation. You are going to ruin Vanessa's life, you vindictive little brat, Richard snarled. We told you specifically that you were banned from this wedding. You are uninvited. You do not belong here among these people. You are nothing but a massive embarrassment to this family. I smiled, a cool, detached expression that only seemed to infuriate them more. I belong exactly where I choose to be, Richard, I replied smoothly. And considering the sheer volume of lies you were just telling Liam's parents, you are the ones who do not belong. Patricia gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. You are insane, she spat. You stole that dress. You probably stole those fake diamonds just to try to upstage your sister. You are a complete sociopath, Beatrice. We are not going to let you destroy this night. Richard did not waste another second arguing. He turned his back to me and forcefully signaled to a pair of burly country club security guards stationed near the exit doors. He waved his arm aggressively, pointing directly at me. The guards exchanged a quick glance before moving toward the bar. I stood perfectly still, watching them slowly approach. The situation was escalating exactly as I had anticipated. Several nearby guests had stopped their conversations, actively watching the dramatic confrontation unfolding by the bar. Vanessa finally noticed the commotion. I saw her excuse herself from Liam's side and hurry toward us, her silver dress flashing under the chandeliers. When she realized I was the target of the security guards, her face lit up with a vicious, triumphant smile. I told you not to come, Beatrice. Vanessa sneered, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. You just could not handle the fact that I am marrying into a powerful, wealthy family while you are living in a tiny, miserable apartment. I am glad the guards are going to drag you out. The taller guard looked between Richard and me, his expression stern and authoritative. Is there a problem here, sir? He asked. Yes, Richard said, puffing out his chest. This woman is an uninvited drifter. She snuck into this private gala and is harassing my family. I want her thrown out. The guard turned to me. Mom, you are trespassing. We need you to leave right now. Patricia smirked, leaning closer to Vanessa. This is perfect, Patricia whispered loud enough for me to hear. Let everyone see her get dragged out like common trash. It will finally prove to Liam's family that we have cut ties. I did not reach for my purse. I simply maintained my calm posture and looked past the guards toward the main stage at the front of the ballroom. Evan had made his move. The event organizer, a polished woman in a sharp black suit, was standing behind the main podium. She tapped the microphone twice. The sharp thudding sound echoed loudly through the entire ballroom, cutting through the string music. The room rapidly fell silent. Richard glared at me, his jaw clenched tight. This is not going to save you, Beatrice, he hissed under his breath. You are still getting thrown out the second she finishes speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, the event organizer announced, her voice ringing clear and bright across the silent ballroom. May I please have your complete attention for just one moment? Tonight is a very special evening as we celebrate the upcoming union of Liam and Vanessa. But tonight is also a monumental occasion for the corporate future of Liam's software company. We are incredibly honored to have a very special, elusive guest in attendance. Liam stood near the front of the stage, puffing out his chest. He looked around the room, grinning widely, fully prepared to welcome his corporate savior. He had boasted to everyone that he had secured the backing of the most powerful tech firm in the city. The event organizer smiled brightly, gesturing toward the center of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the visionary Chief Executive Officer of Apex Digital, the absolute savior of tonight's hosting company, and the sole primary investor keeping their operations afloat. The spotlight swung wildly across the ballroom floor. It did not search for a man in a gray suit. It did not search for Evan standing near the stage. The bright, blinding beam of white light swept directly over the crowd and landed squarely on me, standing by the mahogany bar in my midnight blue silk gown. The entire room erupted into enthusiastic applause. Richard froze completely. The smug, triumphant sneer melted off his face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Patricia stumbled backward, knocking into a cocktail table, her eyes wide and panicked as the reality of the announcement slammed into her. Vanessa let out a strangled gasp, staring at the bright spotlight illuminating my face. The security guards quickly stepped back, their aggressive postures completely vanishing as they realized they had just attempted to throw out the most powerful, wealthy guest in the entire building. I smiled, looking directly into my father's terrified eyes. I slowly raised my crystal glass of sparkling water in a silent, mocking toast. I was not just the uninvited drifter. I was the executioner, and I held their entire fake empire firmly in the very palm of my hand. The blinding white spotlight isolated me in a brilliant circle of illumination. The surrounding darkness of the ballroom instantly felt miles away. I did not blink against the harsh glare. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father. The sheer force of his grip on my bare arm had been bruising just seconds prior. Now his fingers went completely slack. The muscles in his face sagged as the event organizer's introduction echoed through the expanse of space. I slowly, deliberately turned my body toward him. With a sharp, precise motion, I shook off his loose grip. He stumbled backward a single step, as if my physical contact had burned him. His mouth opened and closed in a silent, desperate loop. He could not form a single coherent syllable. The reality of his colossal error was crashing down on his shoulders with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. I turned my attention to the burly security guard who had been prepared to physically drag me out of the country club just moments ago. He stood completely frozen, his eyes darting frantically between my face and the main stage. He looked utterly terrified, suddenly realizing the catastrophic mistake he had almost made in front of Chicago high society. I offered him a polite, clinical smile. I extended my right hand and smoothly pressed the crystal glass of sparkling water directly against his chest. He fumbled to grasp it, clutching the cold glass with both hands, as if it were a fragile bomb. "Thank you for your assistance," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal calm. He nodded rapidly, stepping quickly out of my way and lowering his head in a gesture of absolute submission. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening. Not a single guest coughed, not a single glass clinked. The string quartet had completely stopped playing their bows, hovering uselessly over their wooden instruments. Patricia physically staggered backward. Her emerald green rented gown caught the edge of a tall cocktail table. She slammed heavily into the metal base, sending a silver tray of champagne flutes crashing to the hardwood floor. The shattering glass sounded like an explosion in the quiet room, but nobody even glanced at the massive mess. Every single eye in the country club remained firmly fixed entirely on me. Vanessa looked completely gray. All the blood had violently rushed from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She desperately clutched the edge of the mahogany bar to keep her shaking knees from giving out beneath her. She looked like she might genuinely faint right there on the carpet. I began my walk toward the stage. The wealthy crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, clear path for me. I moved with the slow, measured stride of a corporate predator approaching a securely trapped asset. I kept my posture absolutely perfect, my chin elevated, projecting the exact executive authority that had built my multi-million-dollar empire. The rustle of my midnight blue silk gown was the only sound accompanying my footsteps. I glided past the local executives, the wealthy socialites, and the confused parents of the groom. They were all staring at me with a mixture of profound awe and intense curiosity. As I approached the front of the room, my eyes locked securely onto Liam. He stood at the base of the short wooden stairs leading up to the wooden podium. His jaw had literally dropped open. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He was staring at Evan standing nearby holding the black leather portfolio and then looking frantically back at me. The connection finally snapped into place inside his scrambling mind. The private blind trust. The elusive anonymous founder. The devastating due diligence clause he had arrogantly signed without letting his legal team read a single page. He realized in that exact agonizing moment that his entire corporate future was completely owned by the sister he had actively helped banish. His legs trembled slightly as I walked right past him. He tried to reach out a shaking hand to stop me, but Evan stepped smoothly into his path, blocking his access with a cold professional glare. I gracefully climbed the short wooden steps and walked directly to the center of the illuminated stage. The event organizer offered me a polite deferential nod and quickly stepped aside, surrendering the space to me. I reached out and gripped the edges of the wooden podium. I looked out over the massive sea of faces. The bright stage lights illuminated every corner of the room, allowing me to see the exact locations of my terrified family members. Richard was still standing near the bar, his face pale and sweating profusely. Patricia was clinging to him, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Vanessa was crying silent, desperate tears, ruining her expensive makeup. I leaned forward and adjusted the thin black microphone. I did not scream. I did not throw insults. I did not resort to the petty emotional outbursts they had subjected me to my entire life. I spoke with cold corporate precision. My voice was amplified, bouncing off the high vaulted ceilings and filling every single inch of the silent room. Good evening, everyone. I began, my tone perfectly modulated and relentlessly professional. Thank you all for gathering here tonight to celebrate such an interesting combination of personal milestones and corporate transitions. As the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Digital, I rarely make public appearances. I prefer to let my company acquisitions and financial ledgers speak for themselves. However, tonight presented an incredibly unique opportunity that I simply could not decline. I paused, letting my eyes drift directly over to Liam. He was sweating visibly, gripping the edge of the stage staircase. I want to publicly extend my deepest gratitude to Liam for his remarkably transparent negotiations this afternoon. I stated, my voice dripping with lethal corporate irony. It takes a very special kind of founder to sit in a boardroom and present user acquisition metrics and financial projections with such absolute, unwavering confidence. Liam brought a truly fascinating portfolio to my executive team today. His willingness to sign a binding accelerated due diligence contract without a single moment of hesitation demonstrates a rare, bold approach to corporate governance. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd of wealthy investors. They did not understand the trap, but Liam understood it perfectly. He knew that the accelerated due diligence clause meant my forensic accountants were currently tearing through his servers, exposing every single lie and inflated number he had presented. He knew he was already ruined. Because of his swift signature, I continued projecting my voice clearly over the rising whispers. I am thrilled to officially announce that Apex Digital has successfully absorbed his entire software startup. We have seized total operational control of all assets, all servers, and all proprietary technology. We recognize the profound struggle his firm has faced in recent quarters, the massive unpayable debts, the severely inflated user retention data, and the rapidly dwindling venture capital. It is an honor to rescue such a distressed property from the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. Therefore, please join me in welcoming Liam and his currently struggling team to the absolute bottom rung of the Apex Digital corporate ladder. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked gasps and frantic whispering. Liam's wealthy parents stared at their son in utter disbelief. His father's face turned crimson with sudden humiliation, realizing his son had been lying about his business success. Liam buried his face in his hands, completely destroyed in front of the exact high society crowd he had desperately tried to impress. But I was not finished. I raised my hand, calling for silence once again. The room quieted down rapidly, eager to hear the rest of my address. I shifted my gaze from the broken groom and looked directly at the back of the room. My eyes locked onto Richard and Patricia. They were desperately trying to inch their way toward the exit doors, but the crowd was too densely packed. "There is one more vital acknowledgement that must be made tonight," I stated, my voice echoing like a final gavel strike. Building a successful corporate empire requires ruthless strategy, but it also requires incredibly generous financial backers, people willing to risk everything to support a failing venture. I want to send a very special and very public thanks to Richard Wilson. The crowd turned collectively to look at my father. He froze under the sudden intense scrutiny of hundreds of wealthy strangers. He looked like a cornered animal, completely stripped of his arrogant bravado. Richard so graciously offered his home as collateral for Liam's bridge loan, I revealed. Patricia wailed. "It is a shame about the foreclosure notice filed this morning." The silence that followed was apocalyptic. Vanessa sank to her knees, her dream permanently eradicated. I turned and walked gracefully down the steps into pure, glorious freedom. The apocalyptic silence that had suffocated the grand ballroom suddenly shattered into 1,000 frantic whispers. The guests turned to each other, their voices rising in a panicked crescendo of high society gossip. The string quartet remained completely frozen, their bows hovering uselessly over their instruments. The wealthy crowd, accustomed to polite discretion, was now actively buzzing with the scandalous revelation. Liam stood entirely paralyzed at the base of the short wooden stage. His wealthy parents pushed aggressively through the crowd of stunned executives, their faces pale with absolute horror. His father grabbed Liam by the shoulder, spinning his son around forcefully. "What on earth is she talking about?" "Liam?" his father demanded, his voice cutting sharply through the ambient noise of the ballroom. "What massive debt? What foreclosure notice? You told us your software company was generating millions in pure profit. You told us her father was a real estate tycoon backing your national expansion. You told us this wedding was a merger of two powerful families." Liam swallowed hard, his eyes darting wildly around the glittering room. He forced a strained artificial laugh that sounded more like a desperate choke. "It is just a joke," Dad Liam stammered, waving his hands defensively in the air. "It is a terrible, tasteless prank. She is just a disgruntled former employee trying to ruin the evening. My company is perfectly fine. The Wilsons are incredibly wealthy. Do not listen to a single word she says. She is completely insane." I paused on the wooden steps. I did not need to raise my voice to destroy his pathetic charade. I simply looked at Evan standing by the audiovisual control panel and gave him a single sharp nod. Evan pressed a button on his tablet. The massive digital projector screens flanking the main stage instantly flared to life. The brilliant white light bathed the ballroom in a harsh, clinical glow. I turned back to the microphone. "I do not make jokes regarding federal wire fraud, Liam," I stated, my voice echoing flawlessly through the massive speakers. "Let us take a direct look at the actual numbers you tried to hide from your own board of directors and your future family." The first slide snapped onto the massive screens in high-definition text. It was a redacted public filing of Liam's actual corporate debt. The bright red numbers glared down at the wealthy crowd. The spreadsheet showed massive outstanding loans, defaulted vendor payments, and a daily burn rate that proved his software startup was bleeding capital at an unprecedented speed. He was millions of dollars in the red. A collective gasp rippled through the elite country club. Liam's mother covered her mouth with her hands, staring up at the irrefutable evidence of her son's complete financial ruin. "You see, Liam has been utilizing a very specific strategy," I explained, walking slowly across the stage so every single person in the room could hear me clearly. He severely inflated his user acquisition metrics to secure initial venture funding. When that venture money inevitably ran out, he needed a new anchor investor to keep his sinking ship afloat. So he turned to his future father-in-law. I gestured toward the screen, and Evan immediately switched to the second slide. A bright pink certified foreclosure notice appeared on the glowing screens. It clearly displayed Richard and Patricia Wilson's legal names, alongside the address of the suburban home they had leveraged to the absolute limit. Richard explicitly claimed to be a highly successful real estate investor with vast holdings. I continued my tone devoid of any sympathy. Liam knowingly used Richard's fabricated wealth as collateral to secure a massive bridge loan to keep his company alive. They deliberately colluded to create a fake empire built entirely on fraudulent promises and empty bank accounts. And as you can clearly see from the county clerk filing dated this very morning, the bank is currently foreclosing on the only property Richard actually owns. They are completely broke. Liam's father dropped his hand from his son's shoulder as if his tailored suit had suddenly caught fire. "You lied to us," he hissed, his voice trembling with furious disgust. "You used our family name to prop up this absolute scam. You sit here drinking our expensive champagne while you are literally drowning in debt." Liam reached out desperately toward his angry parents. "Dad, I can fix it," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I just signed the preliminary merger with Apex Digital today. They are buying the company. We are going to be billionaires by next month. The paperwork is already finalized." I leaned closely into the microphone. "You signed a legally binding due diligence contract, Liam," I corrected him sharply. "A contract that explicitly allows my forensic accounting team to seize all of your internal servers and expose the massive federal fraud you committed to inflate those user numbers. There is no buyout. There is only a severe breach of contract penalty that will officially bankrupt you by tomorrow morning. You fell directly into my corporate trap." Vanessa let out a piercing, hysterical sob that shattered whatever decorum remained in the ballroom. She had been standing near the towering ice sculpture, clinging to the desperate hope that Liam could somehow magically talk his way out of the financial disaster. But looking up at the massive digital screens, displaying the pink foreclosure notice on her childhood home and the crippling debt of her fiancé, the harsh reality finally crushed her. Her knees visibly buckled, and she collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor. Her custom silver gown pooled around her as she wept uncontrollably. "My life is ruined," Vanessa screamed, hitting the floor with her bare palms. "You have absolutely nothing, Liam. You are completely broke." She looked up at her terrified fiancé, her face twisted in pure agony. "I cannot marry a bankrupt fraud. I am supposed to be rich. I am supposed to be a wealthy CEO wife living in a waterfront mansion. You lied to me. You are just a pathetic loser." Patricia rushed forward, dropping to the floor in her rented emerald gown to gather her sobbing daughter into her arms. "It is going to be fine, Vanessa," Patricia cried, desperately stroking her hair. "We will fix this. We will find a way out of this mess. Just breathe, darling." But the surrounding crowd of country club elites was already physically backing away from them. The wealthy friends and socialites who had been politely toasting their fake success just 10 minutes ago were now staring at the Wilson family with unfiltered contempt and pity. The toxic facade had been entirely dismantled in front of the exact people they cared about impressing the most. Their social standing was permanently eradicated. I watched the absolute devastation unfold with complete clinical detachment. I had spent 33 years being told I was a massive disappointment to my parents. I had paid their utility bills, funded their extravagant lives, and endured their relentless daily cruelty. Now they were entirely exposed as the miserable frauds they truly were. I handed the microphone back to the stunned event organizer and stepped gracefully off the wooden stage. I had achieved exactly what I came to do. But as my heels hit the ballroom floor, a heavy hand suddenly clamped down hard on my right arm. Richard materialized from the chaotic crowd, his face purple with a terrifying, explosive rage. His eyes were wide and frantic like a cornered animal, realizing there was absolutely no escape from the slaughter. Before I could pull my arm away, Patricia was suddenly on my other side, grabbing my left arm with bruising physical force. She had abandoned Vanessa on the floor, and her perfectly manicured nails dug painfully into my bare skin. "You are coming with us right now," Richard snarled, his voice a low guttural threat that sent a chill down my spine. He did not wait for my compliance. Using his sheer physical size and desperate momentum, he yanked me violently forward. Patricia pushed aggressively from the other side. They moved with desperate, frantic speed, dragging me forcibly away from the bright stage lights and the staring, judgmental crowd. "Let go of me!" I demanded, struggling to plant my high heels firmly on the polished hardwood floor to halt their aggressive momentum. "You shut your mouth," Patricia hissed, her face pale and heavily streaked with ruined mascara. "You have done enough damage tonight. You are going to fix this financial disaster right now, Beatrice." The surrounding country club guests parted instantly, unwilling to intervene in the violent family meltdown unfolding before their eyes. I saw Evan step forward from the edge of the stage, his hand reaching rapidly inside his tailored jacket pocket, but Richard aggressively shoved a heavy wooden door open before anyone could stop them. It was a private VIP lounge located just off the main ballroom hallway. It was completely dark and entirely soundproof. Richard practically threw me into the center of the dark room. I stumbled, catching my balance against the edge of a heavy leather sofa. Patricia slammed the thick wooden door shut behind us, instantly cutting off the ambient noise of the panicked crowd and the muted string quartet. I heard the sharp, heavy click of the brass deadbolt sliding firmly into place, locking us inside. The finality of that metallic sound echoed ominously through the dark private lounge. They had me completely cornered. The entire ballroom had witnessed my ultimate corporate triumph, but my parents were clearly not finished fighting. Richard flipped the brass light switch, bathing the small, opulent room in a dim, amber glow. He stood intentionally blocking the only exit, his chest heaving heavily, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Patricia stood directly beside him, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her eyes burning with a desperate, toxic hatred. They had lost absolutely everything: their money, their fabricated reputation, and their golden child's perfect future. And as they glared at me from across the room, they truly believed the only way to survive their complete ruination was to break me one final time. The heavy brass deadbolt echoed with a thud against the door frame. The amber lighting cast long shadows across the leather seating. For one suspended second, the suffocating atmosphere mirrored the violent rage radiating from my parents. I stood my ground, fully prepared for their usual barrage of venomous insults. I expected Richard to shout. I expected Patricia to strike me. Instead, the most unsettling transformation occurred right before my eyes. The terrifying fury contorting my father's face completely evaporated. The vicious glare in my mother's eyes instantly softened, melting into an expression of sheer adoration. The aggressive hostility was gone. In its place was a sickening, transparent fawning that made my stomach churn. Patricia lunged forward, throwing her arms around my neck. She pulled me into a suffocating embrace, burying her face against my shoulder as she began to sob. These were not the hysterical tears of a ruined socialite. They were manufactured tears of absolute joy. I stood entirely rigid, my arms pinned awkwardly at my sides, listening to the surreal sound of my mother weeping with fabricated pride. "We pushed you so hard because we knew you had this greatness inside you, Beatrice." Patricia wailed, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. "We are so proud of you, darling." The audacity of her statement hit me like a physical blow. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. My mind flashed back to the countless nights I spent crying in my childhood bedroom, desperate for a single word of encouragement. I remembered the cold, dismissive glances when I launched my first startup, and the explicit ridicule when I refused to take an entry-level job at Richard's failing firm. They had never seen greatness in me. They had only ever seen a rebellious daughter who refused to play the obedient scapegoat. Now faced with the undeniable reality of my immense wealth and absolute corporate power, they were desperately trying to rewrite decades of systemic abuse as some twisted form of motivational parenting. I felt a wave of profound revulsion wash over me. I placed my hands firmly on Patricia's shoulders and physically pushed her away. I stepped back, creating a clear boundary. "Do not touch me, Patricia," I commanded, my voice dropping to a freezing, authoritative register. "Do not ever insult my intelligence by pretending your relentless cruelty was some nurturing strategy. You pushed me away because you despised my independence. I succeeded in spite of your abuse, not because of it. Patricia stumbled back, her fake tears drying up instantly as her face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to argue, but Richard swiftly intervened. He smoothly stepped in front of his wife, adjusting his outdated tuxedo jacket and adopting the confident posture of an executive closing a high-stakes business deal. He completely ignored the emotional devastation, seamlessly transitioning into a state of supreme arrogant entitlement. Now, let us not get bogged down in the past, Beatrice, Richard stated, offering me a wide, predatory smile. We are a family, and families experience growing pains. What matters is the incredible position we find ourselves in tonight. You have achieved an extraordinary level of success with Apex Digital. It is highly commendable. But running a corporation of that magnitude requires a strong, experienced advisory board, people you can trust implicitly, people bound by blood. He stepped closer, invading my personal space with his overwhelming confidence. I am willing to officially step in and take a seat on your board of directors, Richard announced, as if he were bestowing a magnificent gift upon me. My decades of experience in real estate acquisition will be invaluable to your expansion strategy. Family loyalty is everything in the corporate world, Beatrice. We need to consolidate our assets and present a unified front. But first, we have logistical issues to resolve regarding tonight. I watched him with a mixture of absolute fascination and profound disgust. His real estate firm was currently collapsing under millions in bad debt. His primary residence was in active foreclosure, and yet he still possessed the monumental ego to believe he was qualified to advise a multi-billion-dollar technology empire. He did not pause to gauge my reaction. He simply barreled forward, outlining his absurd demands, with the casual expectation of immediate compliance. Liam has clearly gotten himself into a temporary bind. Richard continued, waving his hand dismissively, as if massive federal wire fraud was a minor accounting error. But Vanessa loves him, and this wedding must proceed flawlessly to maintain our social standing. I expect you to authorize the immediate release of Apex Digital funds to clear the mortgage on my estate. We will frame it as a strategic corporate investment. Then you will personally pay off Liam's outstanding business debts. It is a minor expense for a company of your size, and it will save your sister's marriage. Once the financial landscape is stabilized, we will announce your role in our family empire and everyone wins. We walk out of this lounge, you tell the guests the foreclosure notice was a clerical error, and celebrate our partnership. The silence in the VIP lounge stretched for several long, suffocating seconds. Richard stood before me with his hands slightly extended, genuinely expecting me to shake on this delusional agreement. He actually believed that after 33 years of treating me like a disposable burden, I would instantly hand over my fortune to save his fraudulent lifestyle. The absolute lack of self-awareness was staggering. I did not laugh. I did not raise my voice. I simply unclasped the shiny silver latch of my designer clutch. I reached inside and carefully pulled out a thick, black legal folder. The heavy cardstock felt solid and reassuring in my grip. I looked directly into my father's incredibly expectant eyes and casually tossed the folder onto the glass coffee table separating us. The heavy folder landed with a sharp, definitive smack against the clear glass. There is no merger, Richard. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. Apex Digital is officially withdrawing the acquisition offer effective immediately. The corporate documents finalizing the buyout have been permanently suspended today. My legal team filed the necessary injunctions 20 minutes ago. Richard stared at the black folder on the glass table as if it were a venomous snake. His confident smile completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panicked confusion. "What are you talking about, Beatrice?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "You just announced the acquisition on the main stage. You cannot back out now. The contracts are signed." I shook my head slowly, savoring the moment. The contracts Liam signed were preliminary, contingent upon a thorough, accelerated due diligence process. And that process revealed exactly what I showed everyone on those projector screens: gross misrepresentation of assets, falsified user acquisition metrics, hidden liabilities. Liam committed severe federal wire fraud to secure initial funding, and then he used your heavily mortgaged foreclosed home to illegally back a bridge loan. Apex Digital does not ever acquire toxic, fraudulent liabilities. We destroy them completely. Patricia let out a terrible, strangled gasp, clutching the expensive leather sofa for support. You are abandoning your own family, she whispered, her voice laced with genuine terror. You are letting us lose our home. You are ruining your sister's wedding over a business technicality. It is not a technicality, Patricia, I replied coldly. It is a serious federal crime, and I will not spend a single cent of my hard-earned money to bail out a family that never lifted a finger to help me when I was starving. You wanted to throw me out of this country club tonight. You wanted the security guards to drag me into the street. Now you get to walk back out into that giant ballroom and face the exact social ruin you deliberately tried to orchestrate for me tonight. Suddenly, the heavy brass door handle rattled violently. A loud, desperate pounding echoed against the thick mahogany wood. Someone was slamming their fists against the door with frantic, terrifying force. Richard spun around, startled by the noise. Before he could reach the deadbolt, the door burst violently open. Liam practically fell into the private VIP lounge. His expensive tuxedo jacket was torn. His perfectly styled hair was drenched in nervous sweat. His face was contorted in absolute panic. He had clearly fought his way through the crowd to find us. He stumbled forward, ignoring Richard and Patricia entirely. He lunged directly toward me, his knees hitting the soft carpeted floor with a heavy thud. He clasped his hands together, looking up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. He had heard my final words through the opening door. If you back out, I am bankrupt tomorrow. Liam sobbed, literally begging at my feet in front of my horrified parents. Please, Beatrice, I will do absolutely anything. If you do not fund this merger, the banks will seize my servers. The federal investigators are already calling my board members. I will go to prison for wire fraud. Liam's breath hitched in his throat as he stared up at me from the plush carpet of the VIP lounge. He clasped his hands together tightly, his knuckles turning white as he begged for corporate salvation. He rambled incoherently about miscalculations and aggressive growth targets, desperately trying to reframe his deliberate federal wire fraud as a simple accounting error. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single shred of sympathy for his display. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the man who had actively conspired with my father to build a fake empire on absolute lies. You lied on federal financial disclosures, Liam, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. You deliberately falsified your user acquisition metrics to secure millions in venture capital, and then you used fraudulent collateral to secure a massive bridge loan. That is a very serious problem for your lawyers, not me. Liam let out a pathetic whimpering sound. He reached out blindly, attempting to grasp the hem of my silk gown, but I took a deliberate step backward. His hand grasped empty air. You do not understand, he gasped. They are going to seize everything. My cars, my shares. I will have absolutely nothing left. If you pull out of this acquisition, the federal investigators will tear me apart. I will go to prison, Beatrice. I am going to be your own brother-in-law. You were never going to be my brother-in-law, I corrected him smoothly. You and Vanessa made it explicitly clear that I was permanently banned from your perfect wealthy family. I am simply the chief executive officer of the tech firm that just initiated a hostile takeover of your bankrupt company. My forensic accounting team has already forwarded all your internal emails and falsified ledgers to the Securities and Exchange Commission. There is no escape, Liam. Your corporate career is permanently over and your freedom is expiring. Richard aggressively pushed past his sobbing future son-in-law. He realized Liam was a lost cause and immediately attempted to salvage his own financial survival. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice booming aggressively across the room. Fine, Richard snarled. Let the fraud rot in prison. I do not care about him or his software company. But you are still going to clear the mortgage on my estate, Beatrice. You are going to transfer the funds to my accounts immediately. I am your father and you owe me respect. You have billions of dollars sitting in the bank. Paying off my house is mere pocket change for you. You will fix my financial situation right now before we walk out. I turned my gaze away from the broken groom and locked eyes with my father. His arrogant entitlement staggered. He thought he would force me to submit to his will, just as they always had when I was a child. But I was no longer a frightened little girl living under his roof. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a second document. I did not hand it to him. I let it flutter from my fingers, landing softly on the glass table next to the cancelled merger agreement. As for the house, I announced, my voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. My firm's banking division bought the debt from your lender yesterday. Richard stopped breathing. The domineering posture instantly vanished, replaced by a shock that rooted him to the floor. His eyes darted to the white document resting on the glass table. It was a formal transfer of deed bearing the official seal of the state banking authority. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "I own the paper on the house you kicked me out of," I stated, pronouncing every syllable with clarity. "I hold the rights to the Beacon Hill estate, and considering you have not made a mortgage payment in over 14 months, the property is legally mine. You are currently trespassing on my real estate. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before I send the authorities to remove your belongings." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a fabricated reality shattering into a million jagged pieces. Richard staggered backward, his legs hitting the edge of the leather sofa. He collapsed onto the cushions, his mouth hanging open as he stared blankly at the glass table. He had lost his power, his status, and his home in a single devastating stroke of corporate retaliation. He was officially nothing. Vanessa, who had been standing frozen by the heavy mahogany door, finally cracked under the immense pressure. The dark reality of the situation crashed over her with crushing, undeniable force. She was not marrying a billionaire tech genius. She was not moving into a waterfront mansion to live a life of endless luxury. She was legally tied to a bankrupt felon, and her childhood home now belonged to the sister she had relentlessly tormented for decades. Her perfect illusion had instantly vaporized. Vanessa let out a shriek. She threw her hands into her hair, tearing at the extensions with energy. "My wedding is ruined!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the lounge. She stomped her heels furiously against the plush carpet, destroying her bridal image as mascara ran down her cheeks. "My life is completely over. You ruined my perfect night. You ruined my entire future. You are a monster, Beatrice. You are an absolute monster." She continued screaming and sobbing hysterically as she paced the room like a trapped, frantic animal. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I simply watched her unravel, recognizing the poetic justice of her destruction. She had spent her entire life stepping on me to elevate herself, and now she had fallen from the pedestal she built. Patricia could no longer maintain her false composure. The horrific realization that they were going to be homeless by tomorrow afternoon shattered her dignity. She dropped heavily to her knees on the floor, landing right beside the groom. She scrambled forward, her gown bunching up around her legs as she crawled toward me. She reached out and grabbed the soft silk fabric of my dress, wrapping her trembling fingers tightly into the material. "You cannot do this!" Patricia wailed, staring up at me with wild, terrified eyes. "You cannot throw us out into the street. We are your family, Beatrice. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head for 18 long years. You owe us. You have to save us from this nightmare. Please, Beatrice, I am begging you. Do not take our home away from us. We have nowhere else to go." I looked down at Patricia, grasping my dress. I looked at Liam weeping on the carpet. I looked at Vanessa tearing her hair out in a corner, and Richard staring blankly at the wall. This was the family that had tried to destroy my confidence, my career, and my self-worth. They had demanded my unconditional loyalty while offering me nothing but relentless cruelty and manipulation in return. They had explicitly banned me from this gala, hoping to humiliate me one final time. They wanted to discard me like useless trash. Now they were on their knees begging for mercy and expecting me to play the role of the savior. I reached down and peeled Patricia's fingers off my midnight blue silk gown. I did it slowly and deliberately, ensuring she felt the finality of my physical rejection. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, restoring my flawless appearance. I looked down at them with icy calm. My expression was a perfect unreadable mask of corporate detachment revealing no emotion whatsoever. Family? I asked, my voice a quiet lethal whisper. No, we are not family. You threw me out because I was a useless burden, remember? You told me I would never amount to anything. You instructed the country club security to drag me out into the street tonight because I was an uninvited embarrassment to your reputation. You made your choice years ago, and you reaffirmed it this very evening. You wanted me gone. You wanted me erased from your wealthy narrative. I picked up my designer clutch from the glass table, intentionally ignoring the legal documents sitting there. Those papers were their ultimate problem now. I am just an unemployed dropout passing through, I stated, throwing their own vicious insults right back into their terrified faces. And dropouts do not pay for mansions or bail out federal criminals. I turned my back on the pathetic, sobbing mess. I did not look back again. I gripped the heavy brass handle of the mahogany door, twisted the deadbolt, and pulled it wide open. The bright lights and loud, frantic whispers of the grand ballroom instantly flooded into the dark VIP lounge. I walked out the door and let it slam shut behind me, sealing their absolute final ruin forever. 3 weeks passed in a blur of swift, absolute corporate justice. I sat at the expansive mahogany desk in my corner office overlooking the glittering city skyline, reviewing the final dissolution documents for Liam's software company. The sheer speed of the collapse was entirely predictable. Once the federal investigators received the unredacted financial ledgers my forensic accounting team provided, the highly anticipated criminal indictment was officially handed down within 3 very short business days. Every single local business journal ran the explosive story directly on their front pages. The massive bold headline detailed the massive wire fraud, the fabricated user metrics, and the spectacular, highly public downfall of a supposed tech prodigy. I drank my espresso reading the articles with clinical detachment. The consequences of their profound arrogance had fully materialized. Without my secret funding propping up their manufactured lifestyle, Richard and Patricia lost the suburban home. The bank executed the foreclosure notice with ruthless efficiency. They had ignored the warnings for months, choosing to spend their remaining credit on rented emerald gowns and country club memberships instead of paying their mortgage. Now the bill was definitively due. The bank did not grant them an extension. The bank did not care about their fabricated social standing. On a crisp Tuesday morning, a fleet of heavy white moving trucks pulled into their circular driveway. Uniformed bailiffs carrying official court orders marched up the pristine brick walkway and unlocked the front door. They began the systematic removal of my parents' entire life. I watched the live feed from a private investigator I had hired to document the eviction. It was a necessary precaution to ensure they did not attempt to illegally strip the property of valuable fixtures before vacating. The video showed the bailiffs carrying out the velvet sofas, the antique dining table, and the crystal chandeliers. Patricia stood on the manicured front lawn, clutching her designer handbag, weeping uncontrollably as she watched strangers load her prized possessions into the back of a dirty truck. Richard paced back and forth near the mailbox, shouting empty legal threats at the indifferent workers. His outdated tuxedo was gone, replaced by wrinkled khakis and a stained polo shirt. Their neighbors, the same people my parents had desperately tried to impress for decades, stood on their porches, openly staring at the humiliating spectacle. The financial ruin of my parents was only one facet of the implosion. Liam was officially indicted for multiple counts of federal wire fraud and attempting to defraud financial institutions. His passport was immediately seized, and his bank accounts were frozen. The moment the federal charges became public knowledge, his wealthy parents executed a brutal maneuver. To save their own pristine social reputation and protect their remaining corporate assets, they cut him off. They issued a statement through their family attorney declaring they had absolutely no knowledge of Liam's fraudulent business practices and were severing all financial ties with him. They abandoned their own son to the federal prosecutors without a second glance. Vanessa was completely stripped of her lavish future. The waterfront mansion she had bragged about, the endless luxury vacations, the status of being a wealthy chief executive officer's wife, all of it evaporated into thin air. She was left standing in the wreckage of a massive criminal conspiracy. She drove to my parents' foreclosed suburban home in the middle of the chaotic eviction process. She arrived in a compact rental car, having returned her leased luxury vehicle the day prior. Liam was in the passenger seat, looking pale and terrified. The private investigator's camera captured the meltdown. Vanessa slammed the car door shut and marched up the driveway, dodging two bailiffs carrying a heavy oak dresser. She spun around to face Liam, who had tentatively followed her out of the vehicle. The resulting screaming match echoed down the quiet suburban street, entertaining the watching neighbors. "You lied to me!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysterical rage. She threw her diamond engagement ring directly at his chest. The expensive stone bounced off his jacket and landed in the overgrown grass. "You told me you were a billionaire. You told me we were buying a private island. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic criminal." Liam raised his hands defensively, desperately trying to calm her down. "Vanessa, please listen to me," he pleaded, his voice catching. "My lawyers are working on a plea deal. We can still get married. We can start over somewhere else." "Start over?" Vanessa screamed, laughing maniacally. "Start over with what, Liam? You have no money. Your parents disowned you. I am not spending the best years of my life visiting my husband in a federal penitentiary. The wedding is completely off. We are entirely finished. Do not ever contact me again." She turned her back on him and stormed toward where Patricia and Richard were standing on the lawn. Liam stood completely alone in the driveway, staring blankly at the discarded engagement ring in the grass. He slowly turned around, walked back to the rental car, and drove away, leaving my sister stranded at a house she no longer owned. Vanessa collapsed into Patricia's arms, sobbing loudly, as the bailiffs carried the last remaining boxes out of the front door and locked the deadbolt. The golden child had lost absolutely everything. Her entire identity, built solely on marrying into wealth, was completely destroyed. She had nothing left to brag about, and no one left to look down upon. By the end of the week, the reality of their sheer destitution set in. Patricia and Richard had nowhere to go. Their credit cards were declined at every hotel in the city. Their wealthy country club friends mysteriously stopped answering their phone calls. The social elite they had desperately catered to completely abandoned them the moment the foreclosure became public knowledge. They were officially homeless. Desperation breeds intense humiliation. They managed to scrape together just enough loose cash from selling a few remaining designer accessories to fill the gas tank of Richard's aging sedan. They packed their few remaining suitcases into the trunk and drove straight toward the coast. They drove for 3 hours until they reached the massive wrought iron security gates of my private Cape Cod beach house. I was sitting in my sunroom, drinking a cup of green tea, when the perimeter security alert chimed softly on my tablet. I tapped the screen, opening the live camera feed positioned at the front gate. Richard and Patricia were standing in the cold coastal wind. They looked completely broken. Their clothes were wrinkled, their faces drawn and exhausted. Patricia pressed the silver call button on the glowing intercom panel. She waited, shifting nervously from foot to foot. When I did not answer immediately, she pressed it again, leaning her face close to the speaker. "Beatrice, please answer the intercom," Patricia begged, her voice cracking with genuine desperate tears. "We know you are in there. Please, darling, we have absolutely nowhere else to go. The banks took the house. Vanessa is staying on a friend's couch. We slept in the car last night. We are begging you, Beatrice. Just a small loan. Just enough cash to keep us out of a cheap motel for a few weeks until your father can secure a new position. We are so incredibly sorry for everything we ever said to you. We were completely wrong. Please, open the gate." Richard leaned over her shoulder, staring directly into the camera lens. He looked utterly defeated. "Beatrice, please," he said, his voice devoid of its usual arrogant boom. "We are your parents. You cannot just leave us out here in the cold. We will pay you back every single cent with interest. Just give us a second chance to prove we can be a real family." I watched them cry on the high-definition screen. I observed their pathetic, desperate performance with complete emotional emptiness. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. They were only apologizing because they had exhausted every other possible option. They were only begging because my bank account was their final remaining lifeline. I set my teacup down on the glass table. I reached forward and firmly pressed the microphone button on my tablet screen. "I will not give you a single dime," I stated, my voice projecting clearly through the heavy intercom speaker at the gate. My tone was absolute freezing iron. "But I will pay for an intensive family therapist for you to figure out exactly why you hate yourselves so much." Patricia let out a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated fury. She screamed a vile curse word at the camera and violently punched the metal intercom panel with her bare fist. She instantly recoiled, grabbing her bruised hand in pain. Richard grabbed her by the shoulders, physically dragging her away from the gate and pushing her toward their rusted sedan. I released the microphone button, turned off the screen, and peacefully finished my green tea. I watched the rusted sedan reverse out of the driveway on the high-definition security monitor. The vehicle kicked up a small cloud of white coastal dust as Richard jammed the gear shift into drive and sped away down the winding private road. The red taillights vanished around the bend, obscured by the thick line of ancient pine trees that guarded my property boundary. The digital screen flickered back to a static view of the empty wrought iron gates standing tall against the gray afternoon sky. I sat alone in the quiet sunroom, the only sound being the distant rhythmic crash of the Atlantic Ocean against the sandy bluffs below. For a fleeting second, a familiar heavy sensation clawed at the back of my throat. It was the old ingrained guilt, the toxic conditioning cultivated over 33 years of psychological manipulation. A tiny residual voice in the deepest corner of my mind whispered that I was a terrible daughter, that I had broken the sacred covenant of family loyalty. It was the same deceptive voice that had kept me awake for countless nights during my 20s, wondering exactly what I had to achieve to finally earn a single nod of genuine approval from Patricia or Richard. I closed my eyes and took a long, slow breath, feeling the cool, salty ocean breeze drifting through the open window. I allowed that feeling of guilt to surface, acknowledging its presence without fighting it. And then, with the absolute clarity of a woman who had finally opened her eyes, I let it go completely. I realized in that profound moment of silence that I could not heal people who were entirely committed to their own toxicity. My parents were not victims of circumstance or victims of my sudden corporate success. They were the proud architects of their own utter destruction. They had chosen vanity over substance, cruelty over compassion, and fabricated social status over their own flesh and blood. I could have handed them $1 million right there at the security gate, and it would not have changed a single fundamental flaw in their character. They would have simply taken my money, used it to purchase another temporary illusion of grandeur, and continued to view me with the same resentful contempt they had always harbored. Giving them a second chance would have only provided them with fresh ammunition to destroy the peace I had painstakingly built. The invisible cord was officially cut. The haunting ghosts of my childhood were permanently banished to the other side of that iron gate. I turned off the security monitor and walked out of the sunroom, stepping onto the expansive multi-level cedar deck that wrapped around the back of the massive beach house. The late afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting a brilliant golden hue across the rolling ocean waves. The air smelled of salt and wild seagrass, a sharp, clean scent that instantly invigorated my senses. The harsh, sterile environment of the country club ballroom felt like a distant, fading nightmare compared to the raw, natural beauty of my coastal sanctuary. I walked toward the wooden railing, resting my hands on the smooth surface as I stared out at the endless expanse of deep blue water. I was not alone for long. The heavy sliding glass doors behind me glided open, and the sounds of genuine laughter and warm conversations spilled out onto the deck. Evan, my brilliant chief operating officer, stepped outside carrying a large silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes. He was followed closely by a group of people who represented everything my biological family was not. There was Sarah, my fiercely loyal college roommate, who had let me sleep on her cramped apartment sofa when my parents first cut me off. There was Marcus, my lead software developer, who had worked 90-hour weeks with me in a windowless rented garage to launch Apex Digital. And finally, there was Julian. Julian walked towards me with a soft, understanding smile illuminating his handsome face. He did not wear a rented tuxedo or a luxury watch purchased on credit. He wore a simple, comfortable linen shirt and weathered jeans, carrying a bottle of expensive vintage champagne in his hands. Julian had loved me long before I was a billionaire chief executive officer. He had asked me out on our first date when I was just a struggling marketing manager eating instant noodles and working until midnight every single night to keep my startup afloat. He had never cared about my net worth or my family's fabricated social standing. He only cared about my ambition, my resilience, and my heart. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin gently on my shoulder as we looked out at the ocean together. "They are gone," Julian asked quietly, his voice a soothing anchor in the turbulent sea of my lingering thoughts. "They are gone," I confirmed, leaning back into his warm embrace. "And they are never coming back." I offered them the only thing they actually need, which is professional psychological help to understand why they destroy everything they touch. They violently rejected it. There is absolutely nothing left for me to do. "You did the right thing," Beatrice Julian murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. "You cannot set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. You built a magnificent life from the ashes they left behind. It is time for you to actually enjoy it without carrying their heavy baggage." Avon approached us holding out 2 crystal flutes. He had a triumphant gleam in his sharp eyes, holding his digital tablet tucked neatly under his left arm. The entire executive team had gathered around the outdoor stone fire pit, the warm flames crackling cheerfully against the cooling evening breeze. "I hate to interrupt a romantic moment," Evan announced, a wide grin spreading across his face, "but we have some highly official corporate business to attend to right now. I just received the final confirmation from our legal department in New York. The ink is completely dry, and the wire transfers have successfully cleared the international banking hurdles." I took a champagne flute from the silver tray, feeling a genuine smile light up my face. "Is it officially finalized, Evan?" I asked, watching the rest of my friends gather around us with eager anticipation. "It is officially finalized," Beatrice Evans stated proudly, raising his own glass into the air. "Apex Digital has successfully acquired the Vanguard Logistics Network. It is a completely legitimate, fully vetted acquisition that expands our global infrastructure by 40%. No fraudulent user metrics, no hidden liabilities, no federal wire fraud, just brilliant strategy and flawless execution by the best executive team in the entire technology industry." A loud, enthusiastic cheer erupted from the group. Sarah clapped her hands together joyfully while Marcus whistled loudly over the sound of the crashing waves. Julian clinked his glass against mine, his eyes shining with unfiltered pride. This was my real family. These were the people who had stood by me during the grueling days of uncertainty, the brutal late-night coding sessions, and the terrifying moments of financial instability. They had never demanded superficial perfection. They had only demanded honesty, hard work, and mutual respect. I raised my glass high, the golden sunlight catching the rising bubbles in the crystal flute. I looked around at the smiling faces of the people who mattered most in the world. I thought about Liam sitting in a cold federal holding cell, waiting for a bail hearing that his wealthy parents would never attend. I thought about Vanessa screaming in the driveway of a foreclosed home, realizing her entire life was a shallow lie. I thought about Richard and Patricia driving away in a rusted car, utterly consumed by their own bitter vanity. To the future, I announced, my voice carrying clearly over the ocean wind. To building empires on a solid foundation of truth, rather than a fragile foundation of lies. And to the family we actively choose for ourselves, the ones who lift us up instead of tearing us down. To the future they echoed in unison, their voices blending into a beautiful, harmonious chorus. We drank the crisp, cold champagne, and the sweet taste of absolute victory washed over me. I turned back to look at the ocean, watching the sun slowly dip below the horizon line. The sky exploded into a breathtaking canvas of deep violet, fiery orange, and brilliant magenta. The dark shadows of the past were completely swallowed by the brilliant light of the present. I realized with profound clarity that being thrown out of my parents' house all those years ago was not a tragedy at all. It was not a punishment or a curse. It was the ultimate catalyst. Their cruel rejection had provided the exact spark I needed to burn down their toxic expectations and forge a path of my own making. They had tried to bury me in their backyard, but they did not realize I was a seed. The worst night of my entire life had inevitably transformed into my ultimate liberation. I was finally free. Have you ever had a moment where losing what you thought was your entire support system turned out to be your greatest blessing? Have you ever had to let toxic family members drown in the consequences of their own actions? Share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more stories of sweet, undeniable justice. The hardest truth we often have to learn in life is that sharing blood with someone does not automatically entitle them to your unconditional loyalty or your peace of mind. Beatrice's journey is a powerful testament to the reality that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need the most protection from. We are deeply conditioned to believe that we must endlessly forgive and accommodate our family members no matter how toxic they become. But as Beatrice discovered, appeasing manipulative relatives is a battle you will never win. If you hand them your hard-earned wealth, they will simply drain it and then resent you for making them ask. True empowerment requires recognizing that you cannot heal people who are fundamentally committed to their own destructive behavior. You cannot buy their genuine love, and you certainly cannot save them from the consequences of their own calculated actions. Setting an ironclad boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is a vital act of self-preservation. The initial guilt you feel when walking away from your parents or siblings is completely normal, but it is just the lingering echo of years of manipulation trying to pull you back into the dark. Once you finally sever those chains, you make room for your true family. Family is not biology. Family is the partner who believes in your dreams when you have absolutely nothing. Family is the loyal friends who stand by you and build the empire alongside you. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own sanity? How did you find the courage to set that ultimate boundary? Share your experiences in the comments below. If Beatrice's journey to freedom resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and sweet justice. Thank you for watching, and remember that your peace is always worth protecting.